Hi, this is Denise Matthew, and welcome to episode 20 of the Mandala of Life. 365 days to self-discovery. Today we're going to talk about the gate 23, which is actually the first gate that we've ever talked about that resides in the throat center. So a different theme because the throat center is a center for manifestation of all things we want to bring into form. With that said, let's get into episode 20, the Mandala of Life, the gate 23. So like I said, this is the first gate that we're talking about that's in the throat center. And that makes sense because now we've moved into the quarter of civilization, which is where all the throat center gates are found. So we're going to really be talking about how manifestation is spoken. And every one of the gates of the throat center speak to some different level of manifestation. The whole point of the throat center is to get energy there so that we can bring things into form. The gate 23 will be transited by the sun starting May 9th. And if you haven't already, please feel free to check out previous episodes of the Mandala of Life. But before we get into new material, let's go briefly over what we talked about in the last episode. In the last episode, we talked about the gate 2, also called the driver. This is a place where the theoretical magnetic monopole is said to reside. It is also the place that gives us all direction, a built-in GPS that we all have that shows us our life purpose, where we're meant to go, basically our direction in life. But what happens is a lot of times, because we actually are not listening to our inner voice or allowing our inner voice to speak to us, we miss out on the messages that it's giving us. It may not necessarily tell us exactly where we're going in the long run, but it will give us some level of direction. And if we can hold out and allow the universe to show us the way and have some level of uncertainty, but be okay with that, then we can get on the path of where our direction is meant to be in this incarnation in life. We also talked about the gate 14 briefly because it is part of the channel, the 214. Where the gate 2 is the driver, and we could say the pedal, the gate 14 is the fuel that will take us where we want to go. And if you want more details on the gate 2, the magnetic monopole, and the driver of our lives, you can check out episode 19 of the Mandala of Life. For now, let's get into today's topic, the gate 23. And as I said before, this is the second gate of the quarter of civilization, which talks to bringing something into form, or what we could say is manifesting something into our reality. Each of the gates of the throat speak to some level of bringing something into form, and they usually come with I in the beginning. When we get to the gate 23, we're talking about I know, and it is part of the 2343 channel. It is also called an opposition, which there are three of, the 3420, the 4323, and also the 3740. And let's talk about what an opposition actually means. When we look at the Mandala of Life, we notice that there's always going to be something that is opposed to another part because it's a circle. So for instance, if we look at the gate 23, we can look directly across to the other side of the mandala. We can see that it's the gate 43. The thing that's different about this actual channel is that most channels will have an opposition, which is basically like you're bringing two completely opposite energies together, and they are not part of a full channel that would make definition in the body graph. But what happens is there are three of these oppositions, which are part of a channel. They're both part of a channel, but they're also in opposition. So you can see here that they're exactly opposite one another. What that means is a few things. One is that we're always going to have more of these particular oppositions because we know that as soon as the sun is transiting through one of the gates like 43 or the 23, the earth is always going to be transiting through the opposite gate, which would be either the 43, 23, whichever one is the opposite of what's being transited. And then again, when the earth transits through these particular gates, once again, we have more oppositions. So a couple times a year that we have these oppositions. And also if we have a nodal transit, which is much longer, where the nodes are transiting through these oppositions, then you're going to have even more ability to have people who have this energy, the 4323. So it's fairly common to have this particular configuration. So we're moving away from the gate 2, which is individual energy, and we're continuing on with individual energy. But what we're doing now is we're moving from the identity center and the sacral energy to the throat center and also the ajna. Now, the ajna is part of an awareness center. So this is where we get our mutative downloads that have some clarity over time. Now, we're not necessarily talking about the ajna, but it's difficult to pull these two gates apart. And yes, we still will talk about a hanging gate 23, but because we have such a connection with the way the transits move and the opposition that they're in, it is much more common to have a full channel than it is to have a hanging gate. But hanging gates definitely do still exist. So, and we will talk about that. So no worries there. So we are staying with individual energy. We're not moving from individual energy. And we sort of will be continuing with individual energy for the next little while because that's how the mandala falls. One thing to remember about individual energy is there is potential for you to be more of an auditory learner. This is an auditory gate, and all individual energy is auditory, which means that you might find it easier when you carry this energy to hear things, to learn when it's the spoken word, or you might respond to music. And music can be very important and pivotal in your life, especially when you're working through your melancholy. I'll talk about melancholy in a few minutes, but we just want to talk about the idea that this is individual energy, and we're continuing on with individual energy. And now we're getting into mental individual energy. As I said, the gate 23 is part of the throat center. It's a gate that is coming from the throat center. Anything above the throat will never have a motor. A motor is very important and instrumental in how we manifest things. And it's part of the manifestation process in that when you have energy going to the throat, that gives you the impetus to actually bring the things into reality by having them spoken into the world. It's when we speak that the manifestation starts to happen, because all those inspirations and innovative ideas that we have within us begin to come out and come into the real world, and others can hear it, especially when we're talking about individual energy. The thing is, it's mutative energy, something that's never been done before. Individual energy comes with a pulse on and a pulse off, and we don't have any control of when it comes on or when it goes. So we could say it's like a spark that comes into being, and it gives us some sort of an insight into something, especially here, the 4323, which is called the channel of structuring, and it gives an insight. And when the insight comes, it comes like a foreign language pretty much. And the gate 23 might be considered the decoder that actually translate it into a language that others can understand. Because the whole point of any mutation, any innovation, any inspiration that comes from individuality is to actually allow the collective to be part of what you have within your knowing. And the ultimate destination is always to have whatever this new innovation is be adopted by the collective. But it only will be adopted by the collective if they think it's worth knowing and worth having, because no collective energy really wants to change the pattern. They want to keep it the same. And that is why mutation can sometimes be rejected before it's accepted. Most of the channels in human design in the body graph are actually projected energy, which means there isn't a constant energy supply or a motor directly to that channel. And the 4323 is a projected channel, which means that there can be a level of bitterness with this energy, especially when we have the ajna, which is going directly to the throat, because there is good potential that when you have a particular type of knowing that comes into the gate 43, you want to talk about it, or there's potential for you to want to talk about it, to tell people what you know and what you think can be done, or whatever your inspiration is. So there's an excitement to actually share it, because it comes as an inspiration, it comes as a spark, and it's exciting, and you want to show people exactly what you see within your mind. We could look at, for instance, J.K. Rowling. Now, she doesn't have this particular channel, but this concept was she had the story of a wizard boy who had this magical school and found out that he was special in some way and he was magical. What happened with her was she had this whole story in her world, in her mind. Then what happened was she got a book published, and it just went on from there. Now, if you go to a place like Universal Studios, and that's in Florida or California, where they have this particular Harry Potter exhibit, you can see what she had in her mind. So we can see that that's how manifestation looks in the world. It can come from within our head or within our mind, especially with the 4323, into something that becomes a real thing. What was once just a dream becomes a reality. The gate 23 is also called the gate of assimilation. When we talk about assimilation, we talk about this idea of bringing something into form or talking about something so that it can be brought into the real world, to be part of the collective, to assimilate. And that can only be done if we're actually explaining something that people can understand what we're actually talking about. So you have this big inspiration, this really interesting, innovative idea that just comes out of the blue, and after you wait for clarity, you finally get sort of a hit that it's time to actually explain it to somebody. And we know that if we're working with projected energy of any kind, it will always be better received based on if you're waiting for an invitation or to be acknowledged or to be asked for what you know. And when that happens, that is priming someone's aura to be accepting of what you have to say. That does not mean that they will love what you say or they're going to immediately adopt what you have to say. But what it does talk to is the concept that they are at least open to what you have to say. If that's the case and you've had some time and some clarity and the timing is right and you explain what you are actually envisioning for manifestation or something that you want to bring into reality, and people don't understand what you have to say, then that is where we can find melancholy in the gate 23, because you have this inability to decode, to actually let people know exactly what you're thinking and exactly what you want to bring into reality. And when that becomes a disconnect between them and you, like they can't really see what you have in your mind. You can't explain it. And that's the whole point of the whole channel of structuring the 4323 is to make things efficient and easy for other people to understand. That's the concept, that you want to make it easier. You want to bring these, what would be considered a mutative or unusual concept, or something that hasn't been thought of before, something that hasn't been done before, and you want to make it accessible so that other people can understand exactly what you're trying to get across. And as I said, the melancholy comes with this concept that they just don't understand what you're talking about. So this is an important energy, one that comes directly from the mind, and we're trying to verbalize it into the real world. So when we get these melancholic moments, it feels as though we're being rejected, but it could be a few things that happen. So let's talk about how this energy works best. First, the best way to use this energy is, as we already talked about, it is projected energy. So when you're being asked to tell what you know, that's the first part of it. The second part would be to get some level of clarity, because this energy is coming from the ajna. It's connected to the ajna. The ajna is an awareness center, an awareness that comes over time. If we were talking about the solar plexus or emotional energy, we would talk about an emotional wave, and that would be up and down, and you know, we've talked about emotional waves before. If we're talking about the other awareness center, the spleen, I mean, that's a quick, in the moment kind of blip that you get, and it will tell you what to do. It's in the now. But with this type of energy, it is over time, and the more time you allow it to marinate, to kind of give you the clarity that you want, usually the better the expression of exactly what you're intending to say can happen. There's a lot of knowing in this, and I know energy. I know the answer to what you want to know about. And as soon as you say, I know, then that can sometimes lead you into problems, because you may not necessarily know exactly what you've sort of signed yourself up for. So timing is a huge piece in this whole puzzle, as well as an economy of words, because what we're imagining is that we have this image in our head, or we have this idea in our head. What we have to do is take that idea out of our head and give it to somebody else. Now, you could give it as a complicated puzzle with a million pieces. And usually what will happen is that people will not understand what you're trying to say, because it's too complicated. There's too many moving parts, and it just doesn't make sense. So when we have this type of energy where we have these far-reaching concepts, being ahead of our time, we could say, because a lot of this energy is visionary. It's ahead of the curve. So you're trying to teach people or tell people what exactly you see. And that's where we get into this concept of an economy of words. In other words, we're saying that the fewer words you need to, or you will use to express exactly what you're trying to say, the better, because there's less chance that people are going to lose their train of thought or lose you where you're explaining things. And it's important that you get your point across the way you want to get it across. If you have the attention of somebody and you use too many words, or it gets very complicated how you describe it, then suddenly you've lost your opportunity. And it's almost like you get to the Olympics, you've been training your whole life, and you get to the Olympics and you don't do exactly as well as you want it to do in the Olympics, which happens a lot of times, unfortunately. So you've done all this training, sort of allowing for the clarity, reducing the words so that people can really understand what you're trying to say, and you get your point across, because ultimately that's the most important part for mutation to come out of individuality and be infused into the collective, to actually have some level of potential of being adopted by the collective and changing the pattern. And another part of this energy that we can speak to is a concept that when these sparks of innovation come, they can be big downloads. So it can be a lot of information. And not everything is necessary, we could say, which means that the other part of what the energy of the Gate 23 does as well is it filters out. It sort of goes through what's important, what isn't important. So as much as there's an economy of words, there's also an economy of what really matters, what's important to include when we're actually giving this information to other people. What that means is that simplicity is always welcome. Getting rid of the clutter, having more space. Those are all types of things that Richard Rudd talks to when he talks to the Gate 23. And what he also mentioned, which is quite beautiful in his articulation, is this concept that words have a vibration, which we know, but they also have an ability to awaken other people to exactly what you're trying to express and exactly what you're trying to say. Visionaries, innovators, people who are bringing this far-reaching ideas into the collective are definitely going to be unusual in how they think. And that's why they're mutative, and it's important. This is how we get our evolution. This is how we break out of the regular pattern and we move to something new. It's no mistake that the Gate 43 is called breakthrough in the I Ching aspect of it, and the Gate 23 is called splitting apart. So if we put those two things together, we know that we get a breakthrough, and then we have to split it apart to reassemble it in the manifest world. And when we can do this, and when we can get it right so that people can understand exactly what we're trying to say, there is potential for amazing ways of seeing the world express itself from what was once inside of your mind to outside in the real world, to the manifest world. And if we look to the whole channel, the 4323, and really how it all works and how the 23 is all about decoding, we can look to Ra Uruhu. Almost all of the human design information and material that he ever gave was something that he was unconsciously delivering through the 4323. The 23 decoded what was within him, the mutation, the human design mutation. And because of that, the rest of the world was able to get human design. And what he said, especially about the Gate 23, was that when he was out in the world talking about human design and people didn't understand what he actually was talking about, they thought he was crazy or what he called a freak. But when they started to adopt human design and the collective started to understand human design, when they heard what he had to say, they suddenly started to call him a genius. And that's the whole perspective of the Gate 23. Individuality is all about empowering yourself and then empowering others when you feel empowered yourself. And that's the same for any of this energy, especially when we're bringing something from our mind. This is mental energy. This is all about being empowered by your mind. And when you're empowered by your mind, then you can empower others with your mind. And that's what it's all about. So understanding that clarity comes over time. Time really is the key to all of it. When we have the ability to give the world our inspirations, to speak with clarity and brevity exactly what we see in our mind, and that's when there's potential for the collective to actually adopt exactly what we have talked about, to somehow incorporated into the world to mutate the pattern, to change the world based on what we've shared with them. And when we've spoken the words and been understood, and the collective see exactly where we want to go in the future and what we want to manifest, then that's when the mandala of life spins again, and we get to the gate 8, which is all about giving a platform or having a creative role model to place the mutation in an area where we can start to give it to the rest of the world. Well, that's all for now, and I'll be back soon with episode 21 of the Mandala of Life, the gate 8, the gate of contribution, and also the gate of the channel of the creative role model. Until then, take care, and I'll see you again soon.